is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Haunting of Bly Manor. Season 1, Episode 4, The Way It Came. In this episode, we find out exactly who Dani keeps seeing behind her in the mirror, then sees in front of her. It's escalating. I don't really like this pattern. And it's very, very sad, honestly. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Ashleigh is in the chat. Hello. So this, I was sort of thinking about this, the whole idea of ghost stories. And sometimes the whole, alleged occurrence that leads to a supposed haunting, sometimes it can be something sort of like terrible and scary, like a brutal murder, something that sort of can be sensationalized in a way that's like almost exciting. But when you really get down to it, most ghost stories start off with a terrible tragedy. Something horrible happened, and one of the parties could never get over it. Whether it's somebody who was killed and has stuck around because they never got over it, or whether it's somebody who was in love with or involved with maybe the mother of, who knows, one of the people who was killed, who haunts the place looking for their child, looking for their lost love, whatever. It really is sort of it makes a lot of sense to think about being haunted by an event like Dani is when you look at where most ghost stories sort of originate. And it, in some ways, takes the fun out of it when you think about it that way. But also, I feel like it's an interesting way for human beings to sort of try and cope with terrible events and traumas. It's just sort of an acknowledgement almost that sometimes you don't recover from trauma. And we make it into a story, but there is a feeling of real life to it, if that makes sense. Ashleigh says, you'll be pleased to know that there were very few hidden ghosts this episode because it had so many flashbacks away from the manor. I did notice. I was looking for them again, but again, it's hard sometimes to see. Sometimes I feel like I should watch it on my computer instead so that I can see them. But I also do really enjoy y'all telling me where to look while I'm recording, because that's fun. So I can't decide. So, all right, let's talk about Dani and her ex-fiancé, Edmund. I feel so sorry for her in this story, because while I am not the kind of person who sort of like lets life have its way with me, and by that I mean you go along hoping that something's going to work out. I've always been I'm going to make this happen kind of person, and very take charge. Even before I went to college, I was trying to get out of where I lived and go to a boarding school and didn't tell my parents I was applying, that kind of thing. However, it's a very different thing to talk about your future in that way, in terms of like a career, or I'm going to be recording on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend next, and a whole thing with that is her mother wanting her to be a lawyer so badly. Dani is in a very different position because it's her sexuality, which is a major determinant to her future and what she does. And it's also something that especially in the era that we're watching, was not going to be as accepted. Even today, it's a really difficult thing for a lot of people to come out to their family. And, you know, we're talking like, what, at this point, 20 years ago? 30 years ago? It's enough that it would have been such an obstacle, especially if you're not entirely sure that's what's going on. I have a lot of friends who have begun to realize over the past couple of years that they're queer. They have always considered themselves straight, and then they're beginning to realize, like, not really. I just didn't have the words for it because I wasn't only attracted to the opposite sex, and everybody seemed to think you could be straight or you could be gay, and that was what you could be. And they have begun to see the spectrum and realize that it's just not that simple, and it's freeing in that way. But if you are living in a time where there's not really like a vocabulary for that's accessible without getting into a culture, and by that I mean now we have the internet. You can hang out in queer-centric spaces that are very sex positive and talk about things anonymously with people who have experience or are looking to get experience, and you can learn about the different identities. You can understand more about just in general how other people are feeling, and it makes you feel less scared of how you're feeling. But in this era, you had to like find people using sometimes like body language, going to clubs or bars and like kind of putting yourself out there ahead of the fact sometimes, because just being seen at one of these places would, you know, cause an issue for you sometimes. It was just, I can't imagine how much harder it must have been for people to try and assess what was going on with them if the straight life just didn't seem like it was right. And poor Dani, it's like, it seems that she has more of an inkling here. I wasn't really sure how far along the line she had come to like quite facing the fact that she's obviously either bi or gay, queer. And it seems pretty clear to me in the, you know, moment that she's getting fitted for her wedding dress that she is aware of her attraction to women. It's not a secret. It's not sneaking up on her. It's something that she has just suppressed so much that she often can sort of pretend it's not there. Now, the thing that I thought was a little bit weird, and I'm interested to see a show of hands on who else mistakenly interpreted this the wrong way. When she's talking to Edmund and they're getting ready to go out for their engagement party, I think it is, or is it their wedding? It's an engagement party. They aren't married. He says something like, "We just have to get through this and then they'll leave us alone." I really thought he was gay and they were doing a sort of like beard to beard wedding, you know, where they were each going to pretend to be straight for the other person and then continue on being themselves once they actually got married and were free to just sort of like live without people constantly asking, when are you going to get married? And it turns out that's not it at all. He is not only straight, but he has been asking her to marry him repeatedly for years. So yeah, I just kind of, when I heard him say, after this, they'll leave us alone, I was like, oh, good for her. She's like acknowledged this about herself, and so has he, and they're going to try and do something to work around it, which like, it's not ideal, but I can understand how it would feel expedient to do this. And then when I realized like that's not the case, my heart plummeted for her, because every scene where she is with her mother or Edmund's mother, I don't remember her name, I don't know if it's important, but she is trying so hard to like play this role. And as she says to him later, I wanted to want it so bad. And that is the worst position to be in my opinion, is like knowing that if you just didn't feel this uncontrollable way that you feel, your life would just be easier. Things would be so much easier for you. And you think you can control it, and you go on for a while kind of thinking that. And then finally you're faced with the reality that like, oh no, this is just going to be who I am. End of story. There's no undoing, fixing / reshaping myself at that fundamental level. Let's see. Ms. T says she never thought that. Ariel says that's what I initially thought too, but after the dinner and car, it didn't seem so. Yeah, definitely not. I thought he was feeling the pressure of attention and he assumed that was what's wrong with her too. Yeah. And I just hate, yeah, exactly. Melanie says, I wanted to want it got me so much, especially that she stresses she does love him because she does. That's exactly it, because I could see how confusing that would be. You love somebody and you know that that is real, but the extra layer that is supposed to be there, and I say supposed, and I like to put an asterisk about that because I recognize that there are people who are asexual and for whom sex just isn't necessarily a factor, but, if we're talking about people who are not asexual, there's supposed to be an attraction, a physical aspect. And if that's not there, it just can be like, is it me? Maybe it's me, and, it's awful to watch not only how much she is struggling with this, but how not present her mother really is. It's clear in a lot of ways that Edmund's mother was a bit of a surrogate mother to her because her mom didn't really do the support thing. And I really think that this is something that doesn't get addressed enough in fiction, is when you are involved with a person to the point that you are going to get married or are married, sometimes you grow very close to their family. And it's an odd situation once you break up because there's not really a good way to handle that feels comfortable to everybody. I did not have this issue. Oh, when I met Brendan and I met his parents, I thought that they were really nice people, and they were, but they were also really clingy and demanding. Super generous and kind, but it always felt like there were sort of strings attached to everything. And it was we were expected to spend all our time with them when we had days off. And so when we split up, there was a bit of a breath of relief for me of just feeling like, I'm so glad that I don't have to deal with this overbearing family anymore. Even though we moved, they would still just come to visit us from Connecticut. But I do know a few women who grew really, really close to their ex-husbands, mothers or sisters, brothers sometimes. And when they split up, it was just really difficult because not only were they losing their significant other, but they felt like they were losing a big part of their actual family. And it's already hard if you have mutual friends with a significant other and your friends feel like they have to pick sides, or you have to pick which friends you're going to try and stay in touch with. But you add the family thing on top of that, and it can be heartbreaking, especially when Dani just doesn't seem to have a strong connection with her mother. And it's really clear Edmund's mother wants so much to develop that connection with Dani. She's putting a role on Dani that I think could have been welcome if things weren't the way they are. I think that Dani could have been down for this. It's just the circumstances surrounding who Edmund is and the fact that it's not working out. It's just makes it so much worse. So it's just the whole thing with his mother is so especially she gives Dani, I think, her old wedding dress or her mother's wedding dress. And Dani gets really emotional. And I felt like that was a genuine moment for her of there's regret and grief there too, because I think she realizes, I really like this woman and she's being so generous and kind. And I recognize that and I want to be able to accept it. But it comes with this relationship that just doesn't mean to me what it's supposed to mean. So eventually, she kind of comes to terms, finally, with the fact that she isn't ready. And it's an awful scene at dinner. They're going to get married in like 2 or 3 days. It's days away. I don't remember how long. And Edmund sort of says something about how, like, he was really nervous because she's saying that she thinks they should scale back the wedding. That's her initial sort of explanation for why she's acting nervous and kind of jumpy. And he's willing to accept that, and then says, I was worried you were going to say you just didn't want to get married at all. And she doesn't say anything. She just looks at him, and it's like, this is one of those awful moments where if you feel something strongly, and I'm sure you guys have run into this, somebody will say exactly how you're feeling, and you want so much, for the sake of the peace, to be able to say, no, that's not it at all. But they have nailed it so completely that you cannot muster any actual, like, sincerity behind the words. No, that's not it. It's just like all the fight suddenly goes out of you because, oh my God, somebody finally said it. And it's a terrible feeling in a way because it's almost like you're watching from the outside, but there's also like, oh, thank God, there's like this relief, you know? And she gets into the car with him because obviously he's freaking out. He tells the story about how he's asked her to marry him a bunch of times. And it's one of those stories that's like, I'm sure you think this is a cute story, but everyone else just sees a bunch of waving red flags. And it's kind of crazy that you don't see it that way. And it causes me to question everything about your judgment. Because honestly, repeatedly asking someone to marry you, and they finally, you wore them down, is what you're telling everyone. That doesn't feel romantic or like something that you should be proud of sharing with everybody. And it just reminds me, there was a story that a woman told in a Doctor Who episode a few months ago where she was explaining how she met her husband and she would have to walk through the woods to get home from work, and he followed her home every day. And it was told like it was this romantic thing, when obviously a man wrote that episode, because that is the scariest thing I've ever heard. Like, oh my God, that's a horror movie. That's just not romantic. But guys just fucking don't hear themselves, I swear to God. So she, in the car, is trying to explain to him that she loves him so much. And she doesn't, like, I don't think she tells him that she's gay. I don't think that even comes up. It's simply that she doesn't want to get married. And I wanted her to tell him that she was gay and see if that, like, caused any change in his reaction. Because he seems to really just be taking this as, like, a personal rejection. Which, I mean, of course it is. But if somebody told me, I think I might actually be gay, I mean, I had my suspicions about my ex-husband, and it turned out that that was not the case, but I was sort of like, is that the thing? And I know that it can vary wildly, but for me, if that had been an explanation of what was going on between us, it would have been a relief, because that doesn't have anything to do with me, really. That's all about you, and there's nothing I could have done. However, in that era, especially regarding women, it's always been sort of, well, you just haven't met the right dick yet, right? And so I don't have a lot of hope that it would have changed his reaction. There's a curiosity, but it's not exactly strong in the favor of telling him was the better idea. I just kind of wonder what he would have done. And he rushes to get out of the car. And as he steps out, he turns and there's a car coming straight at him, and it hits him, and he dies in the hospital afterward. And this is what it's so funny. Just last episode, I was like, I don't know, it looks like headlights in his glasses. And it's like the cuts he has look like what happens when you get hit by broken glass. And I had thought that it was him in a car, but it turns out that he was hit as a pedestrian, really. And after this, Dani has to play the role again. She was playing the role of excited bride-to-be. Now she's playing the role of grieving ex-fiancé, or a grieving fiancé. It's not ex as far as everybody else knows. And that's the problem, is that no one else is aware of the fact that they were splitting up. So everybody is treating her like this is the most unspeakable tragedy. And it is, in that he was her friend and she loved him, and this is horrifying. At the same time, I can't help but wonder if there isn't a little bit of relief. And that will fucking haunt you like nothing else, is having a secret feeling of like gladness that somebody is gone and they're not something that you have to deal with anymore. That guilt is serious. And it's sort of brought up later when we're dealing with Owen's mother's death, and he calls her an anchor. And it's, you know, the kind of thing that can be a simultaneous insult or kind of a compliment. An anchor can be something that keeps you steady. It can be something that fucking drags you down. And people can be both things. And it just feels to me like that's sort of what's going on with Dani seeing him everywhere. I can't tell if it's a real haunting or if it's mental. It could go either way. It could also be a combo, you know? It could be completely in her mind that she is haunted by this guilt of feeling slightly relieved and realizing that she shouldn't feel relieved. And so she's manifested something that keeps that relief from actually settling in and makes her remember over and over again freshly. Because, you know, he was like a childhood friend, constant companion since they were children. I could understand sort of deciding to cope with it that way. On the other hand, it could be a genuine haunting. I'll tell you why I think it's the first one, though. Because it wasn't until she began to get close to Jaime that her sightings of his ghost began to change. The first time that she sees him face to face instead of behind her over her shoulder is after she holds hands with Jaime before Jaime gets in the car and leaves. And that's a big step for her of addressing how she really feels and what she actually wants and getting close to somebody else. And then she turns around and he's there. That feels really significant to me. And then this episode, she doesn't see him until she kisses Jaime, and then all of a sudden he's right over Jaime's shoulder. And it just feels like a manifestation of this reminder of what, like, I would imagine she considers his life having, like, her being queer cost him his life, is the shorthand of what she might be thinking to herself. And she'll know rationally and intellectually that that is not true. That's not really what happened. He was upset and he chose to get out of the car. She didn't open the door and push him out. You know, he made his choice, and it was an unfortunate, horrible choice that was like a bad coincidence. But she will see the fact that she was rejecting him and driving him away as the cause, inadvertently. I tend to think that it is a mental thing. But I guess we'll see, you know, because really when you come down to it, a genuine haunting is less frightening than a mental haunting. You know, if we're talking about ghosts as if they are actual things that happen, a ghost you can exorcise, you can smudge a place, You can do all sorts of things to allegedly protect yourself. There's a sort of feeling of control that you can exert upon the world. It's an unknown. Ghosts are scary because they fall out of our usual, like, you know, physical universe. But there are alleged methods. But when it's something that's in your head, and it's not like you have necessarily other issues that are similar. This is just a particular trauma that's like manifesting in this particular way. That sucks, man. There's not a whole lot to feel like you can do about that other than like going to therapy. And how do you tell a therapist that you see a ghost all the time when you don't think people are going to believe you? She finally tells Jaime in this episode, but Jaime clearly doesn't really take it that seriously and is absolutely interpreting it the way that I am, which is she's seeing her ex because she's not ready to move on, which is, I mean, most of us, I think, would sort of see it that way. And so it's not like Jaime, when I say she's not taking it seriously, it makes it sound like she's making fun of her, and it's not. She's taking it seriously in the way that she interprets what's actually going on here. But it's not like she's being like, oh, you see there's a ghost here? Well, we got to deal with this ghost problem. It's not like that. And by the end of the episode, I really thought there would be a sort of dealing with him and getting him at least to sort of back off. But instead, what we get is sort of more of an acknowledgement. Dani throws his glasses in the fire, which, by the way, were like forced on her by her almost mother-in-law. What a terrible scene that was, guys. Like, her mother-in-law clearly is desperate for connection with somebody who cared about her son. She's suffering. She's in horrific grief. I don't get the impression that his dad is still around, or if he is, it doesn't seem like he's a major factor. And this woman wants so badly to be able to grieve with Dani. And Dani is feeling so much guilt she can't do it. You know, when this woman's at her front door offering her something that used to be her son's, and Dani doesn't actually even invite her inside. It's so hard to watch because I understand her not doing that. And to be honest, I'm not somebody who deals well with people just showing up at my door. And when it's grief, everybody grieves so differently from one another that it's really hard to be like, you should have acted this way. That's not fair. So even if the circumstances weren't what they are, and Dani were genuinely mourning somebody that she was actually in love with, freaking out and being like, I really have to go, and closing the door would still be understandable behavior. But it's knowing that behavior would be understandable and something that she could later bring up with his mother when she was ready and be like, I just was having such a hard time coping. I'm so sorry. Instead, what we have is this like guilt that I don't think she's ever going to be able to share exactly what happened. I don't feel like that's going to be an option. And so she either keeps playing this role forever in order to like maintain a connection with this woman and always, and goes to her grave pretending she was in love and that was how it was with them. Or she ends the relationship with his mother as well in an effort to finally like be who she actually is. And what a terrible choice to have to make, you know, not having a mother in her life that she could depend on. One would hope that getting a second chance at that would work out, but it looks like that's not happening either. So yeah, I don't know. It's just really, really sad. And this is one of those things that there are so many stories out there like this of people who lived a lie and never actually got to be genuinely who they are. And it's all just because people are so damn small about shit. And what it could have been, what could our world be if we weren't the way that we are? You know, what could be avoided? What heartbreaks and tragedies could be avoided? Just with a simple shrug of the shoulder, like, oh, okay, you know? So let's see. There's a bunch of comments. Sorry, guys. Ashleigh says, in fairness, we don't hear exactly what they say. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, I can't marry you, I'm not attracted to you. Not specifically I'm gay, but maybe in her eyes alluding to it, but it feels like a rejection to him. Yeah, I wasn't sure how much of that... I like just watched this and I was trying to remember because I feel like it jumped into the car and they were already finishing the conversation. So I guess that's what happened. I think that was probably why they included Owen's mom with dementia. Really life scary. Obviously not people with dementia, but the illness itself. We do see his dad when the doctor is going in to tell them that he's passed away. Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. Ariel says, we do see the husband, but also in that era and further back, a lot of times the husbands are emotionally distant because patriarchy. So perhaps she just needed to lean on another woman who could understand her grief, and Dani was it. Yeah, and I think too, like she said earlier, that she had wanted a daughter so badly. And I could really understand, you know, being a woman, raising a son with a maybe traditional husband who is sort of distant, feeling like this daughter figure is going to allow you the room, you know, that you didn't have. And I really feel for his mother so much as well. She doesn't understand what's going on. And, you know, in her mind, this like connection she's trying to create makes such sense. And yet it's not really coming together. And how confusing that must be for her, and heartbreaking in another way. Like, she thought she was getting a daughter after years of wishing she had a daughter, and then overnight loses her son and seems to be losing that daughter as well. Ugh, God. Melanie says her mother-in-law is basically begging Dani to take the glasses, but to me it didn't feel like a nice gesture. It just felt like offloading her burden onto Dani. Take them so I don't have to look at them kind of thing. I think two things can be true. I think it's definitely her trying to offload, and also wanting Dani to demonstrate that she wishes for a piece of him. You know, like, I think the fact that Dani has been as withdrawn, this is his mother kind of being like, don't you want to hold on to something? And I don't know. It's just, oh God, what a nightmare. Just really is. So yeah, she finally, like I said, sits down and tells Jaime about it. They begin to make out. Jaime asks, are you sure? And Dani says yes, but it becomes clear very quickly she is not ready. She wants to be, you know, and I understand that so much. We really do oftentimes do better at moving on if we insert another, like, stranger into the place of the person that we are getting over. And it's just not for everybody, but for a lot of us that can be true. And I hate this moment for her when she looks up and sees him, and how it's not just the fact that she's disappointed that this fucking thing hasn't left, but Jaime seeming embarrassed. Like, I think that when she says another time, that she means it in a way, but at the moment that it happens, it just feels like something you say to calm somebody's feelings. And that really, the next couple of times that they run into each other, I feel like Jamie's going to be kind of cold towards her and distant, not because she's angry, but because she's nervous and doesn't really know how to cope with this sort of thing. So, yeah, the whole thing. Ugh. So, okay. Oh my God. Leighton says, the real ghosts were the tears we shed along the way. So, okay. I've talked pretty much about everything with Dani. Oh, and one thing that I wanted to mention as well was, I've been thinking over the opening sequence of this show, because what it is portraits of people that kind of begin to molder, and their eyes specifically are what disappear. And I think that's really interesting. It's not that they're rotting away and turning into skeletons. There's an element of like rot, but it's more like they get scarred and their eyes are just sort of covered over with skin. A very odd visual, and I'm not sure what it means. And I've been sort of feeling like it has to be a hint towards something, but I really can't figure out what. And all I keep thinking is like, more like blind Manor, am I right? And I don't know if that's anything, or if this is actually going to turn out to be significant at all, or if it's just, you know, they felt like it was a spooky image and they really wanted to do something that would kind of unnerve you, and that was all there was to it, you know? But anyway, okay, so in the midst of these flashbacks, we have the whole thing that's going on with Owen's mother. And Dani is getting dressed for the funeral in the only black dress that she has, which is like kind of a mini dress, and is much more sort of a party look. It's kind of funny because, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, Jaime comes in to check on Dani, and she says something about how Dani is going to scandalize the town if she shows up in that dress. But Jaime is wearing an actually shorter dress with like sheer lace tights. And in my opinion, her look is much, much edgier and slightly more revealing than Dani's look. And I found it bizarre that, you know, I understand it being more of a party dress and maybe not being appropriate because of that, but the wording that she uses, being you would scandalize the town, it's weird to me because she sort of, this is what motivates her to not go to the funeral at all. Like, this is the suggestion. It's quite a dress, she says. And I don't know. It's just sort of a weird thing to me. Luis says, is it just flirting on Jaime's part? I don't think so, because that's quite a dress with the eyebrow. That doesn't feel like a compliment to me. It could be, and maybe she's just bad at flirting, but I don't think so. Ashleigh says Jaime has tights on. Dani's shock horror got her legs bare. No, she does not, girl. She has like black hose on. So that was part of what I meant, is like she's got like a much more overall conservative look and like low-heeled pumps and these, you know, it's just a weird thing to me that it does look a bit like you're trying to scandalize the village. And I was like, what? And this is when she says, I just don't want to let Owen down. And she says, Jaime says, he won't mind. Honestly, you don't have to go if you don't want to. So it is a weird thing that, like, I just didn't really understand giving her this dress and this look in particular, if that was what the dialogue was going to be. It just didn't feel like it worked at all. But anyway, this comes down to, it seems that Owen was genuinely being like, you really don't have to come, guys. You really don't. And that's one of those things that I feel in the moment when people hear that, they don't think that you're serious. But personally, I am not somebody who like puts a lot of stock in real traditional rituals when it comes to friends' obligations. If it's family, it's a different thing. But I wouldn't expect my friends to come to my mother's funeral. I would find that a little bit weird, probably. I would appreciate the gesture, of course. And depending on how close I was with them, too, of course. But I would feel uncomfortable, and it would feel a bit like I would have to perform some labor to like welcome or host them or something. And it would just, I don't know. I can understand really meaning it and just sort of feeling like, no, don't come. It's totally fine. So she does decide not to go, which I was genuinely surprised by. I kind of expected this to be an episode where we're dealing with death in a much more like sort of upfront way. But, and we do wind up dealing with it, but it's, after the fact, it's in flashbacks, you know, and it's just different than what I thought. This is the moment where she asks Jaime to, unzip her, and then she jumps because she sees the ghost again. And, just her acting, honestly, I have to mention this. This actress does so well at being startled repeatedly, scared when she's startled, and absolutely flipped out. Like, that's a hard thing to get across and make me really feel it viscerally. And I swear to God, I start to like jump into a panic every time she does, because it's coming through the screen. She's just really, really effective. So, good on you, girl. That is really something. So, okay. Then we go to her having changed, and she goes to visit Flora down at the graveyard. Flora is doing grave rubbings, which I was real into when I was younger. The gravestone that she's at, I think says like 16 something. Yeah, 1629. I'm trying to see the name. We've got an Ambrose Lloyd and something else. But yeah, Flora's talking to her about whether Owen's mother will be at the funeral, because they didn't get to bury her actual parents. They had to just bury empty boxes and pretend. And I know I've said it already, but this little girl, God, she's good. She's really good at being like adult in little moments, but feeling like a child still, and being creepy occasionally, but still being kind of adorable, and you want to protect her. She really straddles that line, and that is not easy to pull off. But yeah, this is when Dani says to her, your parents are still here. And Flora says, they're not. They're really not. I'm sorry. And I love that. She apologizes. Like, she doesn't want to hurt Dani. But I've looked and looked, and I haven't seen them anywhere. Which we know that she's being quite literal when she says that. But Dani doesn't understand that exactly. Not yet. I feel like she's going to. And then she ends it with, we can pretend if that makes you feel better. So, yeah. At this point, they go into the church. And it's a moment of me really expecting that we're going to get another ghost, because this church has so many shadows in it. So many. But I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ashleigh in the chat, I don't think there's a ghost that we've seen in the church yet. A chapel, I think, is really the correct terminology. Ashleigh says, I'm really glad they brought her back. She was the sister that died in episode 1 of Hill House, and I'm glad she has much more to do. That's right. I forgot you guys said that she was in Hill House. I completely forgot about that. Ambrose Lloyd and George Jackson, and then later in the church there's an engraving for a Viola Lloyd. Not as far as I've noticed with the ghosts. Okay. So when they run in there, Mrs. Gross is in there. And I gotta just say again, you guys, I have such suspicions about Mrs. Gross. There's something going on, and I don't know what it is, but there is something going on, and I feel a way about it. And the fact that she's always in this church feels significant to me. Maybe it's just part of who she is as a person, you know? Maybe that's just her faith. But I don't know. And she's lighting these candles, and there's just this, like, again, this sort of ritual to it. I don't know. And it's such a weird moment when Dani goes and asks her about whether or not she would go to the funeral. And she says that she hasn't been at that church since before I was, when I got married. And as she says it, she like holds her hands up to her face, and there's something like really affected about it. I don't even mean to say that in terms of like she's being affected like as a personality trait. I mean that there's something about the way that she does that feels significant, and I don't know if it's anything. Yeah, I have nothing but respect for Owen, but she was long gone. Dementia is a savage thing. And she says, I pay my respect in my own ways. He understands that funerals are for the living. It's up to the living to decide what they can and cannot bear. And again, that wording, like, are you not living? Like, what is it? What's the deal? What's the deal? Also, I'm going to keep track of what she's wearing because I've realized I haven't really been doing that. She's got a sort of raspberry colored trousers, pleated front, and a navy blue turtleneck. And I don't know, again, if that's anything, but I'm going to start keeping track of it because she just interests me. There feels like there's a thing there. I'll say this about the show, too. The fact that they decide that they're going to incorporate ghosts in the background so frequently makes it that much more interesting when there's a scene that looks like it should have a ghost in the background and there isn't one. It just keeps you a little bit paranoid, and I feel like that's a good fucking method to keep your audience on their toes. And then the whole thing later on with Mrs. Gross, and she's making Owen's favorite, and Flora says, but Owen's not here, and then he does indeed turn it up, and Mrs. Gross says something to him, or he says something about how he didn't even mean to head for the house, but when he got in his car, he just found himself heading this way. And it's said in a way that's sort of meant to be, I just automatically head here when I'm having a hard time without even intending to do it because I know I'll find the support I need here. But there's a part of me that feels like there's more to it than that. I may just be, assigning supernatural shit to everything because that's just my instinct with a show like this, and it might not be there, but nevertheless. So, yeah, they are making dinner, and at this point, Jaime comes in and tells them, that it must be a relief for him, but he wasn't acting like it was a relief, because he seemed almost just shell-shocked. And then finishes it with, I would be relieved, though, if I were her, losing myself a bit every day. And how unfair it is. Jesus Christ, just shoot me. And, I mean, I really could feel like there's everything feels like it's got some other layer of meaning to it, and I just don't know how much that's true or how much that is just me reading into it all because I am obsessed to find out exactly what the fuck is going on here. But all right, so oh god, and I forgot about this is the moment where Dani goes to the sink to like rinse the potatoes that she's just peeled, and she looks down and sees Edmund's hands like over her hips, and she looks into the like metal of the faucet and sees him there in the reflection, and she jumps, and she winds up heading out to get a breath of air, and as she's walking through the house, she spots Peter again through the window, and he's like the length of the house. He's walking with her past a couple of sets of windows to the door. And it's really like clear that he is looking at her. The way that he turns his head as he's walking when she stops dead still, it feels very directed at her. And she goes to the door. She's got the fucking sword that she drew out of the umbrella stand, yanks the door open and holds the sword up. Or is it a sword? Is it a poker, maybe? And it turns out that it is Owen at the door. And I can't figure out what this is, because Owen was outside and didn't see him. So either this is also in her head a little bit, but I mean, we saw that obviously Miles can see him, or only some people can see him, or I don't know. Maybe there has to be something else going on with you for it to like show. I don't know. But yeah, this moment was like very confusing because previously it's felt very explicable that other people haven't seen whatever she has. And in this moment, it's just, again, I said that Peter looks like he's looking directly at her. But is that because he's manifesting to her specifically and that means that nobody else can see her? Because, I mean, one could say Owen is very distracted, obviously, because his mother just died and has come to the house sort of unintentionally. But I really think that he still would have seen the guy. The front of the house is flat. We've seen from the outside several times what it looks like. That would not be an easy place to hide. So, don't know what's going on. And like, Dani is so shaken at realizing that this is not who she thought, and she doesn't really know what to do with this. And I really appreciate how protective Jaime can be of Dani in these moments. And, you know, is telling him, "Oh, and you prat, how could you be out here like startling nervous Americans," the whole thing. So we go to another flashback, which I talked about already, and then we come back to dinner with our friends. And Owen is talking about how perfectly Mrs. Gross made the meal in imitation of his mother's recipe, where there's a bit of Marmite in the gravy, which is a pretty good tip, actually. I have not thought about uses for Marmite other than spreading it on toast, which I have tried and did not care for, let me tell you. But I could see it being like sort of like anchovy paste, where it adds something to the flavor of a more complex meat-based dish, and you're just like, what is that? And it just, you know, does a little extra. So again, there's just, I'm watching fucking Mrs. Gross, trying to see if she is eating anything. I see her like breaking bread into pieces. I don't actually see her chewing, but I'm going to keep an eye out. I know that you guys said that she tasted his batter. I just sound so filthy when I say that, but I'm not sure if that counts. I don't know. And here comes this amazing monologue that Flora gives. Oh my God, you guys. It is so good and so heart-wrenching and just so good. Basically, she tells him, "I know it feels like you're dying, but the very fact that it feels like you're dying means that you are alive. And I also found out the secret, which is that they're not gone." And that's one of those lines that I feel like could be really, really creepy. For me, in the context of this, I found it really sweet. Even if it is that she means that they're ghosts, nevertheless. Yeah, but she said, like, I felt like I was walking around dead, but everybody could see and hear me, because I was feeling like that because actually I was still alive. You have to feel that way. I wasn't dead. I was just really, really sad. And she's just so good. And the way that Owen is looking at her with his little fucking bow tie, is he the cutest fucking thing ever? He really is hearing her. And this is something that is so underrated for kids. I totally get it too, I would like to say. Kids are a lot. I only have to spend an hour or so with like Owen's aunts and uncles' kids. And I say aunts and uncles with a sort of asterisk because that's not really correct, and I want to take a nap. So I am not mad when people can't give kids their full attention, because it's just so draining that I don't know what kind of batteries you parents must have in the first place to be able to do what you do. But I know I do not have that kind of battery. I'm not that model. That's a different model. And I don't have it in me. So I want to give that little caveat here. But when you actually look at a kid and pay attention, there is something so important about that to a child. Feeling like an adult actually is like 100% in this moment with you. And it's a rare thing. I remember as a kid myself just always feeling like I was getting half attention. And that's just what parents have to give a lot of the time. And that's still pretty good. But, you know, when you are figuring things out for the first time, everything is this major revelation to you. And you want to share it with the only people that you have in your life. And it makes such sense to me. So anyway, yeah, this moment is so good. And it gets ruined, inevitably, by fucking Miles. Where he says, I want to have a glass of wine. I think I should be allowed to have one. And when they sort of say they don't think that's a good idea, he says, Peter, let me have some. And Mrs. Gross says, will we ever hear the end of Peter Quinn? And they're sort of debating, it feels, whether they should water it down. And this just makes Miles freak out. I don't want it watered down. I want an actual bloody drink. And he like yells it with a very adult anger and then pounds his fist on the table. And Dani shoots to her feet and says, I don't think so. No. And just points to the door. She nods at Flora, who gets up immediately. And Miles sits there looking like he's just going to keep being aggressive. But finally she says, go on, both of you. And he does get up. And I adore Mrs. Gross. You know, I do like that young woman. And she's got the most like satisfied little moment in like the expression on her face. She seems to genuinely be smirking about this. It's the best. I love it so much. Miles, every time, and the conversation that Dani has with him later is so good, where she's like, I think you're trying to act like an adult because you don't have adults in your life that are supposed to be there. So you're sort of like growing up too fast. And I know what that's like, which was such a compassionate thing to say. And I feel like even though I don't believe that's what's going on, and that I also don't think Miles believes that's what's going on, there was something about Miles in that scene that made me feel like he appreciated her saying that. You know, I don't know. So then there's a moment, and I'm going to have to speed things up because I'm nearly out of time. But Dani is standing and waiting for the kids to get ready. And the dollhouse sort of opens on its own. And she doesn't know whether she imagined it. It's one of those things, you know. And she's looking through the house, trying to, I don't know what, just sort of like curious, I think, over what's happening. That got that force the door open, or maybe just, who knows what. So she's looking around, and there's a doll that I think looks like Peter Quinn, right? It's the turtleneck, the whole thing. And she picks it up, and Flora's like, hey, don't touch my stuff. Like, there's a way that I do things here. And I really appreciated that she doesn't freak out. She doesn't do anything like shitty, but she is very direct. And she says, oh, you've got Peter, and looks at Miles's room in a very deliberate way. And I should mention that, like, the doll, Peter, I don't think he's in Miles's room, is he? I'm trying to see, like, exactly, because it's hard for me to place. Maybe that is Miles's room, actually. Okay, so yeah, she's put them together for a reason. But nevertheless, there's a moment where she's looking over Dani's shoulder, and Dani asks her why she's doing that. And she just sort of dodges the question. And Dani is a little bit more forceful about it, but doesn't push the way I wish she would. And she also asks, are you letting Peter into the house? And she says, no, we're not. That's not the way it works. Which, oh my God, if there was ever a moment for, then how does it work to be the next fucking line? But Dani doesn't ask that question. Girl, what is wrong with you? Did you hear what she said? Holy shit. Oh, God. So then we have, I'm so sorry, guys. I'm so behind because I talked so much about the thing with Dani. The scene where everybody, like, makes a toast at the bonfire for people that they have lost. I won't get into it too much, but the thing with Owen felt like it was really significant. We see the first time that Dani sees Edmund behind her at the wake, I think it is, and she freaks out. And then we come back to this moment in the house. Dani is with everybody down at the bonfire. And I should mention that it is a little bit weird to me that the adults are all outside at this bonfire and the kids are alone in the house when we know that there has been a, like, potential intruder. It just doesn't feel like a great idea, but whatever. It's late enough that maybe they don't think it matters. So she gets up to, like, Dani goes to bed, and then we see her, like, wake up sort of in the middle of the night and look at the glasses, and she makes a decision. And she gets out of bed, and just as she does that, Flora turns over, opens her eyes, and sees that the fucking bed in the dollhouse is empty. And I do not care for the fact that this doll is moving around at the same time as Dani on its own. No thank you. At all. So Dani goes out to the fire. Or no, she's about to. And the kids interrupt her. And what it looks like to me is that she sees the one ghost in the dollhouse and realizes that there's a problem. And she enlists Miles's help with distracting Dani so that she doesn't run into this ghost. And I am going to hazard a guess that the ghost somehow lures people into the lake. And they are protecting her from it. That it does something. I don't know why it wouldn't have that effect on them. But whatever it is, it feels like a different thing than, I don't know. And I love Miles's reaction when he sees it, because he's obviously scared, but he can't show it, and he's trying. It's not like it's new to him. He's seen it before, but he has to keep it together. And also, when they go back upstairs, this is when Dani sees the footprints, and it had never even occurred to me, you guys. Not even once, that the footprints are due to the ghost. I thought it was the kids doing something outside. But it's the ghost. Like, obviously, it just never even occurred to me. Oh my God. So then we have the actual, like, last scene after she puts them back to bed. When she heads outside with the glasses and throws them in the fire. And the ghost is just standing there, and it's not even like she's afraid. She's just looking at him with this resignation and says, well, it's just you and me then, huh? And sits down and takes a swig of the wine. And that's the end of the episode. And yikes. I don't know, maybe facing it in this way will do the trick somehow or help, but I don't know. So that's it. That's the end of the episode. And I am so out of time. So, Ashleigh says that was in the hospital a few minutes after they were told that he had passed. I don't remember what that's in reference to, but I'm sure it's fine. Yeah, if you go back and look, they're definitely not kid-sized footprints. Yeah, I don't think I even, saw the footprints in detail enough. I think that I just saw, squelches. We just missed Dani and Jaime's kiss, but they did. Yeah, I mean, I did talk about that earlier, but it's just so overshadowed by how it got ruined that it doesn't feel like a victory to me in any way, unfortunately. Yeah. Oh, the first time she saw his ghost was in the hospital. Oh, right. In the bathroom. But then she sees it at the wake. That's right. Thank you. So yeah, I'm very excited to watch the next one, you guys. I don't know what to think about what's going on, but I feel like the ghost is Viola that's in the lake. It feels like an old ghost, and the way that she's doing the rubbing of Viola's name, that feels like it's meaningful somehow. I don't know. So I guess we'll find out. All right, I better wrap. Thank you guys again so much for hanging out with me and chatting with me. Thank you, Ashleigh, for commissioning this. And I will see you guys again next Friday with a new episode. Oh, boy. Okay, guys. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.